start. It's 10 o'clock, so welcome to everybody who's joining us on the session today. Many of you know me, I'm Heather Myers, I'm the Chief Executive of the Chamber, and today we're having a session today because of the number of very challenging and difficult decisions that many of you will be facing at the moment. It is a difficult and uncomfortable time for many of you in terms of looking at how you manage recovery and how you manage the workforce requirements around that recovery. We've heard talk of redundancy, difficulties with staff facing mental health issues, and also how you would go about making sure that those employment issues are covered compliantly, but with compassion and also with the ability to support employees into finding alternative places of work and alternative employment. So this morning's session will give you a good overview of those key issues, and we'll move on to a Q&A, which will give you the opportunity to chat to us and put questions to us that are particularly on your mind at the moment. The session is being recorded and we will be able to share this with you afterwards, and you'll be able to share this with colleagues as well. So if there's anything you've missed, you'll be able to recapture that by reviewing the recording. So let me introduce the experts today. Firstly, we are joined by Owen and Damian from Darwin Gray. Darwin Gray understand the complexities of employment law and HR practices. They understand how challenging these can be, and regardless of whether you're a business owner or an employee, Darwin Gray's employment law and HR experts work together to provide seamless support to both employers and employees in English and in Welsh. So whether you are joining us today as an employee or an employer, hopefully you will be able to get some good insight today. Damian Phillips is a partner of Darwin Gray, and he advises employers and senior executives on contentious and non-contentious employment law issues. And joining him is Owen John, who is also a partner of Darwin Gray, and he brings with him extensive experience in all aspects of employment law and regularly delivers training on employment law in topics both English and in Welsh. So welcome Damian and Owen to the session today.
Thank you. Morning.
Morning. We're also joined by Emma Benger, who is the Working Wales Project Manager at Careers Wales. Emma is project managing the implementation of the new Working Wales service for Careers Wales alongside the Welsh Government. And that's as part of their employability plan for Wales. Working Wales will be an independent national entry point to employability support, and Emma, I know, will explain this in more detail. So thank you all for joining us today. We'll start the session by having a couple of short presentations to give you a good overview of the issues, and then we'll roll into the Q&A afterwards. If you would like to put your questions to us, there is a Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen. If you drop your questions into that, I will then go through the questions, try and field them and closely link them together, and then I will put them to the panel once the presentations have finished. So please do drop your questions into there so that we can then start to answer those questions as we get into the session. So thank you very much, everybody. I will now hand over to Damian and Owen, who will take us through a presentation in terms of future workforce strategy for business.
Good morning, everybody. You will first of all note that our pen picks on the slide bear no resemblance at all to how we look on video. That's one of the more irrelevant consequences of a global pandemic, I think. So if we kick off, if you to the slide, Charlotte, what we thought we'd do is we'd give you a very, very brief overview, because we've got sort of between 8 and 10 minutes between the both of us. So we've got 4 slides. I will take 2, Damian will take 2. And then if there are any questions leading on from anything we've said or anything else at all in relation to employment law, then please ask away at the end. So in terms of the first thing I was going to talk about, I was going to talk about furlough. Not everybody's favourite topic, admittedly, but inevitably it is quite a central issue, because your strategy going forward as a business in terms of returning people to work or redundancy inevitably is closely linked to furlough and the coronavirus job retention scheme. So by way of context, I'll just give you a brief overview of kind of where we are. I mean, the key date that isn't on that slide is the 10th of June this year, which was the cut-off point for new people being furloughed. So beyond that point, people who haven't been furloughed prior to the 10th of June can't be furloughed afresh, unless they are returning from a period of family leave, which is likely to be maternity leave or shared parental leave. It's unlikely to be paternity leave given the length of time. Then, of course, from the 1st of July, the concept of flexible furlough was introduced. So this enables employers to bring back employees on a part-time basis without ending their furlough and without ending the employer's ability to reclaim under the job retention scheme. We found that uptake to be quite significant, actually. Lots of our clients have been utilising flexible furlough. Then looking forward, the 1st of August, for those employers who haven't been topping up furlough money, so in other words, have been paying their employees 80% of salary up to £2,500, which is what they can recoup from the job retention scheme. To date, furlough hasn't been costing them anything, but from the 1st of August that will change, because from the 1st of August employers will be needing to pay national insurance contributions and pension contributions. Then from the 1st of September, they will have to, unless they've been topping up to 100%, they will top up 10% to the 80%, and they will only be able to recoup 70%. And then from the 1st of October, they'll only be able to recoup 60%. And then the end of October is when we understand at the moment that the scheme will end. In other words, the job retention scheme, which kind of underpins the concept of furlough. And then we've got that bonus, of course, which was announced a couple of weeks ago to great fanfare, which is the £1,000 if an employee who has been furloughed returns and is employed as at the end of January. Just a very brief note on that timetable. What we've been finding in terms of from an employment law perspective, and lots of our clients have been looking at various trigger points on that slide and pinpointing those as the dates that they might well be making people redundant. So fairly depressing topic, but lots of my clients, for example, have been consulting for the purposes of redundancy, which will come into effect as of the 1st of August, because lots of employers are saying, well, that's the first trigger at which this is going to cost us something, and no doubt we will see further spikes in redundancies at each other start of the month. So 1st of September and 1st of October, as this becomes more expensive for employers and the furlough scheme is generally wound down, I think we will see spikes in redundancy. If you want to turn the page, Charlotte, I'll just now briefly talk about return to the workplace before I pass over to Damian. Separate topic completely, but I'm trying to give you kind of a snapshot of a few different things here. So generally speaking, when it comes to returning employees to a workplace, in other words, to a physical workplace, lots of the questions that we've been getting from clients are, how do I go about that? What do I need to do? And our rough guide to that is included on this slide. So the first thing that the guidance says that you must do is that you must risk assess. Now that sounds quite a complicated process maybe, but in short, a risk assessment involves, in its simplest form, 2 columns. What are the risks of returning people to a physical workplace, and what can we do to alleviate or mitigate those risks? Our advice, from a legal perspective, all you have to do is you need to keep a record of your risk assessment. But our advice to clients is that you go further than that and you communicate the findings of that risk assessment. The reason for that is, first of all, it will instill confidence in your staff. They will have great confidence in you and belief in you. And also it will kind of demonstrate on paper, it will demonstrate a paper trail that you are satisfying your duty of care to look out for the health and safety of your people. So that's our top tip is, yes, risk assess, but also communicate the key conclusions of that risk assessment and then put certain things into place. So the second point there is in terms of health and safety measures. I won't bore you with some of the more practical aspects of that, such as hand sanitizers and keeping people 2 meters apart and one-way systems. I'm sure you'll all be quite familiar with lots of those, but those will be different for each organization, and they will be born out of the conclusion of your risk assessment, essentially. Finally, before I pass on to Damian to talk about a few things, in terms of who can return and when, our advice to clients has been, it has to be a two-way discussion with staff. So we've been encouraging staff to engage with people, to run questionnaires, because people's circumstances are very different. You'll have people in your workforce who have got dependents, looking after the elderly, looking after children. You'll have people traveling on public transport. You'll have people who can continue to work quite productively at home. You'll have people shielding. I know shielding will be looked at again in the middle of August, on the 16th of August. But for the time being, our advice is that you engage with people as to their personal circumstances and whether they can return, and then you use that to inform you in terms of a staggered return to a physical workplace. And lots of our clients are never intending to return to a physical workplace, but those who are, lots of them are, on the basis of their engagement with staff, are planning a sort of an A team, a B team, and a C team to return on a staggered basis. So that's a very quick snapshot of two very broad topics, and I'll pass over to Damian for some other topics.
Thanks, Owen. I'm going to briefly look at managing holidays, which may seem quite a strange subject in terms of furloughing and redundancy, but actually it's something that's going to be quite key for a lot of employers, because the reality is that most employees have accrued an awful lot of holiday over recent months, and that bears a cost. You're going to have employees who you're going to need to work, who want to take holiday, and unfortunately you're going to have employees that you may need to make redundant, and they may have accrued a lot of holiday, and that's going to be an additional cost. So what can you do about that? Well, first of all, have a look at your holiday policy. That may allow you to require your employees to take holiday when you want them to take it. A lot of policies are non-contractual, so generally you should, and if your policies are not non-contractual, so if they are contractual, that's something you may want to consider in the future, because custom and practice try and have them all non-contractual so that you can just amend them as you require. I mean, an issue may be what's going to happen if an employee goes on holiday and then has to come back and quarantine for 14 days. You're not going to want to pay them whilst they're quarantined, so that's something you'd want to address in your holiday policy. But in terms of compulsory annual leave, if you got the right to do it, that's fine. If you don't have the right in the contract of employment, there's still a statutory right under the working time regulations. So you can serve notice on your employee that requires them to take holiday, and that notice has to be twice the length of the holiday that you require them to take. So, for example, if you wanted them to take 5 days holiday, you'd have to give them 10 days notice. And that is a common question we've had, is can we ask our furloughed employees to take holiday? And it is clear that you can, but what you'd have to do is top up their pay. So if they're only receiving 80%, you'd have to top it up to 100% for those days that they are taking holiday, and that also applies to bank holidays. So any the May bank holidays that took place. But just make sure that you serve the correct notice. Can you cancel pre-approved annual leave? The answer is probably not. There may be a contractual right to do so, but if you have an employee who's incurred cost, they're going to lose out on that, then it will almost certainly amount to a breach of the implied term of mutual trust and confidence in any event. I think it's something that you should avoid doing unless it's just an absolute sort of dire emergency and you need to have that person in work, and then you may potentially have to sort of compensate them for any losses that they may suffer as a result. The other thing to bear in mind as well is that the government has announced that 20 days, which is the minimum annual leave granted under the working time directive, even though in the UK we actually get 28 days. 20 days can now be carried forward for the next 2 years if they can't be used in the current annual leave year. because unless there's a contractual right to do so, there is no statutory right to carry forward unused holiday from one annual leave year to the next, apart for the next 2 years. So just move on then to the next slide, please. And then the big issue for everyone, redundancy. So, I mean, redundancy should always be an absolute last resort, but unfortunately, the reality of the situation is that for most businesses, or for a lot of businesses at the moment, they have to reduce their overheads because of cash flow. A lot of businesses are not getting any income coming in, particularly in sort of leisure sectors and so on. So they've been relying on the furlough scheme, and as Owen mentioned earlier, you know, it really is becoming a sort of crunch point now with the changes to the furlough scheme. If you are able to explore alternatives, then that's wonderful. Flexible working, reducing people's hours, layoffs and short-time working. It was very common for contracts of employment to contain layoff and short-time working clauses sort of 20 years ago, and they've been phased out. I think it's something now that will come back in, because essentially that's what furloughing has replaced. Limit on pay rises, recruitment freeze and so on. So they're all the usual steps that you should be exploring in order to try and avoid redundancies. But as I said, the reality is that for a lot of businesses, redundancies are going to be unavoidable. And there are two aspects to redundancy in terms of unfair dismissal. So if a claim went to an employment tribunal, one is there a genuine redundancy? And the second is, has a fair process been followed in carrying out that redundancy? An employment tribunal will not go behind the business reason for making redundancies unless it clearly is a complete sham. And the reality is that there's a different reason for making someone redundant, for example, if they were whistleblowing. I think the reality in the current situation is it's going to be very, very simple to justify making redundancies. So it's essential that you get the right processes put in place when affecting those redundancies, so that you don't give the possibility of any procedural claim being brought. So informing consulting is absolutely crucial. You have to inform and consult with all affected employees. If you're going to contemplate making more than 20 employees redundant within a period of 90 days in the same establishment, then the collective consultation regulations will apply. You will need to elect employee representatives if you haven't got them in place, or if you don't have a trade union that you recognise. And then there has to be a minimum of 30 days between the start of consultation and the carrying out of the first dismissal. If it's more than 100 employees, then it's going to be a minimum of 45 days. That doesn't mean that you have to actually consult for 30 days or 45 days, but there has to be that period between the start of consultation and the first dismissal being affected. Statutory notice periods. So the statutory minimum is 1 week for each complete year of employment, up to a maximum of 12 weeks for 12 years service. But of course, if the contract of employment stipulates a longer notice period, then that will take precedence. And then there will be a requirement to pay statutory redundancy pay for anyone with more than 2 years service. Anyone who has less than 2 years service does not have the right to bring a claim for unfair dismissal. So in theory, they could be dismissed without carrying out any process. But if they are part of 20 or more employees, then they do have the right to collective consultation, and failure to collectively consult it can lead to damages of 13 weeks gross pay per employee. So it's a significant sum. So that is something you do not want to get wrong. So that's just touching on a few of the points to do with holiday and redundancy. And if you do have any questions, then please put them into the Q&A.
Thanks, Damian. Thanks, Owen. I was just going to make that point to say there's a couple of questions. There's already questions going into the Q&A. We will get to those. So thank you so much. There's some interesting things in there that perhaps we hadn't thought of in the detail that you've covered there. So I will now ask Emma if she could go through some of the ways that Working Wales can support employees who might find themselves in a situation where they're facing redundancy. Emma, over to you.
Thanks, Heather. Good morning, everybody. As Heather's just introduced, I'm Emma and I'm the project manager for Working Wales. And during my sort of 8 to 10 minutes with you, I'd really like to provide some reassurances that we are here to support your employees and yourselves as employers if you're going through this difficult period of having to make people redundant. So Charlotte, if you can just flip to the next slide for me. So who are we, just in case you're unaware of who we are? Working Wales is the adult service of Careers Wales. We were launched in February 2019, and it's part of the Welsh Government's approach to delivering impartial employability and careers advice as part of their wider 10-year employability plan for Wales. It's about making sure that there's a service available for individuals to get the right support at the right time. I think in Wales there's been quite a lot of complexity in terms of what door do I go through, who do I ask for help and support when it comes to employability. So that the advice you'd get from us is responsive to individual needs. It's tailored. It's not sort of a one-shoe-fits-all service. It is very much individual and based on the individual's needs. It's also there to help anybody reduce and overcome their barriers into getting back into work. As we know, people who have been unemployed or economically inactive for a number of years, they've got other complex barriers to overcome, you know, to get them back into employment. So we can support with that as well. We offer our services, a blended service currently. Usually it would be in career centres, outreach centres. We're based in all the job centres across Wales under normal circumstances. But currently we're able to offer all our support digitally. And that's telephone interviews, one-to-one interviews via Teams. So it's just like having you in the office, but it's a virtual office if you like. We can do group activities, web chats. There's lots of information on the website, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail as the presentation goes on. Okay, next slide. So who can we help? Just quickly, anybody over the age of 16 who have left compulsory education is able to access our support. So for example, unemployed customers who've recently been made redundant or under notice of redundancies, customers who are employed but would like to change career direction or would like to take an opportunity to upskill to improve their career prospects via a personal learning account, we can support them. Furloughed workers, and I'll go on to those in a little bit later, but we do have a dedicated page on the website for people who are currently on furlough to sort of expand their learning, take advantage of some of the free online learning courses that are now available. We also support customers who need employability skills, support with preparing CVs, job interviews, job search techniques, how to sell yourself on social media, how to do the basics in terms of uploading, downloading your CVs in the new digital world that we're now currently working towards. And we also have a contract to work with all customers in the secure estate and those currently in the under probation services as well. So that's who we can help. So it's quite a broad spectrum of customers that we can support. Okay, next slide. So how can we help, which I've already touched upon? What we do is offer information, advice and guidance to support any individual on their next step of their career or work journey. Everybody's at different stages, so we can help them from start to finish and in between. The employability skills angle is what I've just mentioned. During this particular period in time, I think that's going to be an increase. We will see an increase of people wanting that support. If they find themselves being made redundant, a lot of customers we're already seeing who've worked with their employers for a number of years haven't had a new CV updated for sort of 10, 15 years, don't know where to start, haven't had an interview for that length of time either, and it's completely new to them, and they get anxious about that, you know, something unfamiliar. So we can help and support them through all of those things. We do also have something online called the Support Finder. Now, the Support Finder has up to about 60 different Welsh Government or ESF support programmes that we can refer customers onto as well. So as well as referring them onto training, getting them support through React or Access or personal learning accounts, they can also be referred on to a number of support agencies, whether that's to support people with mental health, dealing with anxiety and stress, employability skills. There's a wide range of people, programs we can refer people onto, which covers my next point there. We can also provide customers with access to training and further learning. We can advise on part-time courses, full-time learning, HE learning, free online learning as well. Anything to support people with their next steps of their career. But I suppose crucially in this current climate, it's providing reassurances that there is support there for you as employers and also your employees in terms of redundancy. And I think the next couple of slides, I'll be going into a bit more detail in terms of the React funding that's available through Welsh Government. So what is React? If you've never been in this situation before, the React is a programme of training provided by the Welsh Government. It's fully funded. There's no expectation for the individual to pay any money back at all. And there are 3 elements to React funding. So to be clear, for the individual, they can access vocational training. So the vocational training is an award of up to £1,500 for individuals to access to cover training or update their skills. So they're usually quick, short, sharp courses to get them back into the labour market as soon as possible. We've had people undertake training, anything from sort of driving licenses, HGV licenses, to project management certification, other management and leadership qualifications, whatever they feel is needed to make sure their CV is up to date, so they can sell themselves better. If they feel they're lacking in skills, don't have the necessary qualifications, then they do have £1,500 towards that to access that training. The other element for the individual, so for your employees, is during their training, they can also access the extra support, which is up to £200 of extra funding to cover things such as training, travel costs for training, accommodation for training, childcare in certain circumstances as well. Any barriers that they may have to access the training, there's a £200 fund there to try and, you know, relieve that or remove it altogether. For the employer, this is a really nice part of React. The person who has just been made redundant and have accessed React funding, they've done the vocational training and they've undertaken that. For a new employer who's taken on this, on the React employee, if you like, there is up to a £3,000 employer incentive for anybody, any employer taking anyone on who's just recently been made redundant. So React will pay employers up to 50% towards the cost of any job-related training as well, up to £1,000. So there's £3,000 to cover a wage incentive. The stipulation there is they have to have a 12-month contract, and the £3,000 won't be paid in advance. It'll be paid in 3 instalments, and Welsh Government or the React team will need to see evidence of pay slips. As well as that, whilst that employee is with the new employer, they can also access, like I just mentioned, £1,000 internal job-related training. So if you feel that that new person needs internal training, they need to, certain licenses, certain certification to be able to undertake that job, then again, React will pay up to 50% costs up to £1,000. So the financial support is only available in respect of new recruits who are resident in Wales and is made by the employer direct to React. So anybody accessing React, whether it be individual or an employer accessing the recruitment and training support, they have to be a resident of Wales, or for a business, they have to have a business address in Wales. There are some links on this PowerPoint slides that I think Charlotte will share with you later, which you can follow those links, or I will be sending a series of links through for you to follow directly. So on to the next page. So who can apply? Anybody who's under a current notice of redundancy can apply. Anyone who has become unemployed in the last 3 months as a result of redundancy. Given the current situation, however, just to add to that point, Welsh Government have been extremely flexible around the 3-month rule. So anybody at this particular time who have been made unemployed due to redundancy since January 2020 can still access React. Okay, they've been extremely flexible to meet the needs of the current situation. They have to be currently unemployed and have not continued in employment for 16 hours or more per week for the last 6 weeks or more since being made redundant. Again, if between the time that they've been made redundant and they haven't accessed React and they found some temporary employment in the meantime, and they then find themselves out of work again, Welsh Government have relaxed the rules around this. So it's really important to realise that there's some flexibility around these usual hard rules in terms of accessing React. Like I said earlier, they have to be a resident in Wales on the date of issue of redundancy, and they have to reside in Wales at the time they make their application. The other stipulation is they haven't undertaken any other public funded training since being made redundant. So the last two, they're still very strict on those, but the second and third point, there is flexibility in terms of the programme around those. Okay, next slide. So in summary, applications must be received by React usually within 3 months, but like I said, there's relaxation around that. Applications to React must be made and approved prior to the individual starting work or training. Each case is looked at on an individual basis. Like I said, it's about the individual, not about a one-shoe-fits-all. And to access the training, each individual has to have an appointment with their Working Wales Careers Advisor, who will help the individuals put together a React action plan, submit their application form, gather all the details needed to make that application form as successful as possible. And to date, it's only in very, very rare circumstances that I'm aware of where an individual has been refused React training. And that's usually in extreme circumstances and they haven't met certain criteria. In the main, our job is to make sure that their application forms are approved. So most people, 99% of people, are always approved for training. All applicants will need to also provide proof of age, their address, national insurance number, and their right to live in the UK. So those are the stipulations in terms of React. The important one is obviously that part about needing to come through Careers Wales or Working Wales. We are the only route in for individuals to access React support. Things to consider for your employees before they come to us, and this is quite important. The more preparation they can have before coming to us, the better. So think about what are their transferable skills and areas of experience. What are their priorities? Have they had time to think about what is it they want to get out of a job, their next job or their next career? What does the job market look like now? They need to do some research, think about the opportunities available. This is an element we'll also help them with. We have a lot of labour market intelligence at our fingertips, and we would never advise any individual to go into a sector where there isn't opportunity for them to work and then to progress within that workplace. Is there anything they've always wanted to do and haven't been able to do until now? Have they had time during this period to reflect and think about, what do I want to achieve? Could this be an opportunity to do something different? And also, do they have interests and hobbies that could turn into a work or career? Have they thought about self-employment, for example? The more prepared they are when they come to see us, the more we can advise them on all these different areas. Okay, next slide. So one of the other things that they could be accessing now, whilst they're still on furlough, is the personal learning account. This is quite unique, and currently it's only been piloted in the southeast of Wales and North Wales. However, Ken Skates, our minister, will be making an announcement next week, I believe. We have had sight that this is now rolled out across Wales. Funding for the rollout has been approved. So every college across Wales will now be able to offer personal learning accounts from September onwards. A personal learning account is unique in that usually it's for those who are employed, but again, given the current situation, Welsh Government have relaxed the rules and they're now open to people who are currently on furlough or also at risk of being made redundant. So with React, they have to be under notice of, a formal under notice of, or they've been made redundant. But with personal learning accounts, if they're at risk, they can access this as well. With personal learning accounts, there isn't a cap to the training. Again, it all depends what the individual needs to move themselves, you know, to progress within the workplace, to transfer their skills into another sector. So it's part-time study, business as usual. It would have been flexible study that the college would have had to have put in place around that individual's work, their sort of shift patterns, etc. But given that we're in this unique circumstance, a lot of that study is now online. It's completely free to the individual. Again, nothing the individual needs to pay back. They will get new skills and qualifications at the end of it, and qualifications will range from certification all the way up to degree level qualifications under the personal learning account. Stipulations are they must live in Wales, be 19-year-old and over. They're the main ones. In addition, they have to be employed and earning under the threshold of 26,000. However, if they're furloughed workers, then the median income doesn't apply at all. There's no level in terms of income. They can also be agency staff at risk of being made redundant, or if we have evidence of individuals who have been negatively impacted by the economy. So for example, they've lost their jobs due to the impact of COVID, and they worked in the foundation type economy jobs, and they've been negatively affected by those. So between the React training and the personal learning account training, Welsh Government have got two very unique ways for individuals to access learning and support. And like I said, there's no cap to a personal learning account. I know that there are some training qualifications being offered, and because they're degree level, they're costing upwards of £8,000 to £9,000 per individual. Okay, so good opportunities there for individuals to access. Okay, on to the next slide. We also have, for anybody within the redundant situation and are looking and actively seeking for work, just to see what's out there, we've got our Working Wales vacancy bulletin, which you can access via our Facebook page. It's also online, or individuals can sign up and subscribe, and they'll have a weekly bulletin sent to them into their email address. It can be searched via jobs can be searched via postcode, by region, by sector, etc. And also on our website, there's also links to the Job Centre, Job Help and Job Site pages as well, where there's a whole plethora of opportunities on there for individuals. So just quickly to finish, some of the other support that we can offer. For those living in those particular local authorities mentioned on that slide, there's also something called access training, which the only stipulation there, it's for people who are unemployed. So if you've got any employees who are already unemployed that you know of, and you want to inform them that there's other training available, then by all means send them to us and they can access training. Employability skill support I've already mentioned. Online learning. If there's anybody on furlough, I would really encourage them to take advantage of the online learning currently available. There's a page on our website with links to loads of free online learning with Open University, FreeLearn, which is accessible across the UK. And the online learning levels of qualifications, they range from a level 1 to a level 3, which is your GCSE to A-level range. With the Open Learn courses that are sort of the Open University run ones, some of the courses that they do, those credits can then be pulled across. Should the individual then want to proceed with a degree, those credits can go towards their foundation degree if they wanted to proceed. So there's lots of good opportunities there for some online learning whilst people are at home and are currently on furlough. There's also specialist support that we can offer for any individual or any employee that may have other barriers into accessing employment, such as learning difficulties and disabilities. They're from BAME communities. There's lots of support agencies that we work with that we can provide sort of a family of support for those people to get them back into employment and training as much as possible. And there's lots more that we can offer individuals as well. But I've only got 8 to 10 minutes and I can talk about our service for hours and hours. So I won't bore you with the detail, but just wanted to provide you with reassurances that should you have any individual that needs our support, then we are here to provide that support. And I think on the next slide is just how you can get in contact with us. We are also in the process, just quickly, of reopening some of our centres. We're hoping that we'll be back in Wrexham, Cardiff, Newport and our Swansea centres from middle of August onwards. It will be an appointment only, no drop-ins. And so for any customers who are sort of more vulnerable, haven't got the digital network at home, haven't got the digital capabilities perhaps, then we will be reopening centres. And for employers as well, we're also considering, should you need us to come out onto employer premises to support redundancies, providing we have sight of your risk assessment, and you know we've got our own personal protective equipment, providing social distancing and things like that are in place, then we are open also to come out to employer premises to support your employees with React and any other information. And then that's it from me. I'm not sure if that was 8 to 10 minutes, Heather. I probably ran over, sorry.
It was really comprehensive. Thank you, Emma. There's a huge amount of resource in there, which we will share with you who are watching. You know, obviously there's a huge amount of detail and support and areas that I'm sure would be very, very useful to a number of people who are on the webinar today. I'd like to open up the discussion now. And first of all, we've had a couple of questions submitted in the Q&A. They're coming to Darwin Gray to start with. They're quite quick fire questions. So the first question we've had is from Paul. Is it correct that the £1,000 furlough bonus is only available in relation to staff above a certain earnings threshold? If so, is it pro rata for part-time staff? So I'm guessing that's a Damian Owen question.
Yeah, do you want me to take that one? There is an earning threshold, which is £520 per calendar month. So you have to earn more than that in order to qualify for the bonus. And no, it isn't paid pro rata. We are expecting more guidance on it imminently, which will go into that in a bit more detail. But our understanding for the time being is that no, it's not paid pro rata. It's paid if you hit that threshold. So as a percentage of that person's salary, obviously it's a much greater percentage for lower earners and part-time workers than it is for higher earners and those who work full-time.
Thank you. We've had a question from Malcolm who says, with the holiday notice, does that include weekends or is it just the working week?
Well, the working time regulation, Rule 15 that governs it, is actually quite vague in what form notice should take. Our advice is that you put it in writing because obviously you want to have a paper trail, and that the inference is it's simply calendar days. So that would include weekends.
Thank you. Hopefully that answers your question, Malcolm. And Diane has asked, I think this is obviously to do with the process of redundancy. Do people have to be elected, in inverted commas? Our team leaders have put their names forward to represent the workforce. So I'm guessing that's in connection with the redundancy process. So again, perhaps you could offer Diane a little bit of insight into that.
I think, unfortunately, an election is still necessary. The fact that team leaders may have put themselves forward doesn't mean that every employee there necessarily wants them to represent them. It is important that some sort of process is followed and that everybody has an opportunity to apply and be elected if they wish. So
it could be a really quick round robin email thing, can't it, with a tight deadline?
Because again, there's no actual format as to how the election should take place. It's got to be a reasonable process, objectively reasonable process that gives everybody the same chance. So if in reality everyone's happy for the team leaders to do it. As Owen says, it could just be a simple process of getting confirmation from everyone.
But it is obviously that kind of level of transparency means that you're avoiding that kind of vested interest or that kind of conflict of interest that could potentially occur.
Remember employees as well who may be away. You know, they could be on maternity leave, they could be on long-term sick leave. You know, if they're affected, they've still got to be involved in the process. Thank you.
One of the questions that I hear time and time again actually is a question that was pre-submitted from Gary, and the question is, can you go from being on furlough to a notice of redundancy?
Well, you can serve your redundancy notice whilst furloughed, but you'd still have to go. You can't just simply put someone on redundancy notice without first going through the fair selection process. But once somebody has been identified as being redundant following that process, yes, they can serve their notice period whilst furloughed. It's a bit of a grey area as to what pay they should receive. The consensus is that if their notice is the same as the statutory minimum or no longer than a week more than the statutory minimum, then they must be paid their full pay. So they'll need to be topped up. But that you can use a furlough grant to go towards it. If they're on a much longer notice period, then you can probably keep them at the furlough rate.
Thank you. And the question of flexible furlough comes up fairly regularly as well. Could you perhaps just explain a little bit about the flexible furlough, a bit more detail?
Yeah, shall I jump in on this one? So from the 1st of July, flexible furlough became an option. So prior to that date, of course, it was quite strict in that you were either on furlough or you were working, and there was no hybrid in between. But now from the 1st of July, that's changed. The guidance outlines that you should, if you are intending to place somebody on flexible furlough, then there should be a new form of written agreement in place, at least some kind of paper trail between employer and employee setting out how it's going to work. And essentially, the key issue to cover off is the hours that you work will be paid at your normal full contractual pay, and the hours that you are on furlough will continue to be paid under the furlough arrangement. So up to, unless you're topping up as an employer, up to 80%, up to £2,500. But of course, from September that will change, and from October that will change. So flexible furlough is a hybrid of both, but it's really important that there's something in writing documenting that split between full pay and the furlough pay.
Thank you. That should hopefully clarify that, because it's been these new processes that are coming in and people are trying to work their way through them. So actually getting some advice from you is really, really helpful. One of the issues that we have touched on, and I guess this is a question for everybody, but mental health is obviously a huge issue at this time, both for employers who are having to make the uncomfortable decisions, for employees who are facing notice of redundancy or uncertainty at the moment. I understand this myself. I was made redundant in 2011, and I understand the complexity and a whole range of feelings that that people can have. What would be your advice? And perhaps come to you first, Emma. What would be your advice in terms of ways that we could look at helping mental health? What support is there in terms of mental health through this process?
Well, I suppose from our point of view, in terms of how we can help, I think it's providing reassurances for one, and the approach when you're talking to employees about redundancy. You know, all of a sudden they're faced with a very scary future, short term or long term. And for a number of customers we've worked with in the past, you know, redundancy affects people very, very differently. Some people see it as a fresh start and they deal with it very, very quickly, and they're in the next job very, very quickly. They're very resilient. They don't mind change. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum where it's fear, it's anxiety, it's uncertainty, it's stress, it's how am I going to support my family? How am I going to pay my bills? All of those things then become a huge reality. So I think it's the approach when speaking to employees and providing them very early that there are people here to help and support them and guide them through the whole redundancy process. And in terms of Working Wales, we are here to do our utmost to change that quite quickly for people. So if they've been made redundant, get the support in quickly, help them access training, React and other support packages that are available in terms of mental health in particular. We can refer them on to support agencies that deal particularly with mental health and other areas they may need, and health, for example. And then support them into finding employment opportunities as soon as possible. So we're here to help and guide them through the whole process. They're not on their own in this at all. And I think if you can provide your employees with those reassurances, then at least I hope it'll relay some fear that they may have, that they're not in this alone.
Yeah, I think you're right, and trying to find a way forward, which is why obviously having all the advice that you're able to offer through Working Wales is really important, because it gives people options as to what they need to do next.
Yes.
I was going to ask Owen and Damian, from your perspective, you know, how is there any advice that you could give in terms of safeguarding mental health at this point in time for those people who are in these difficult decision-making processes at the moment?
Yeah, well, I think what you shouldn't do is nothing. And I think it should be on your radar to start with. That's the first thing to do, is to do something. We've had all sorts of stories from clients about employees committing suicide. I had a client of mine, a sister company to a client of mine in London, who had furloughed 65 employees at the start of April, and within a 3-week period, 3 of those 65 on furlough had committed suicide. I think we've got to recognise there is a huge issue here, and I think by talking about it, that's the first step. But in terms of more kind of practical things, because as an employer, of course, you have actually got an implied duty to look out for the mental health of your staff. So that it's the law, essentially. And I think in terms of practical things, communication is the crucial factor, and you've got sort of mentoring and counselling options that you can signpost people to, and have an internal mentoring system. But also from a kind of a more practical management perspective, I think showing appreciation for people doesn't cost anything and goes a long, long way. And I think actually appreciation is valued a lot more than remuneration, and it doesn't cost you. So I think that's another crucial thing, particularly for people who are on furlough, who may well be feeling very worthless. And the final practical tip, I think, always from a kind of management perspective, is if you talk about your own problems and your own issues and how it's affecting you, I think you kind of normalize it for other people. So I think that's quite a kind of a practical tip, is by getting people to relate to you and explaining how you're suffering and how you're dealing with things. I think it kind of generates that communication, which will allow people to be a lot more open about things.
Yes, I think you're right, and communication is key throughout this. Understanding why things are necessary and what is occurring at each stage is really critical. One of the questions that I do get asked fairly regularly is that it is proving quite difficult to get people back from furlough in some situations, and that's for a whole range of reasons, sometimes to do with health concerns or requirements of being at home. You know, they've got childcare, we're in school holidays now. But what can be done if an employee refuses to return to the workplace? Perhaps Owen and Damian. Damian, perhaps you could come in on that one.
Yeah, I mean, we've all gone through, you know, the world's been turned upside down over the last few months, and it's affected people in lots of different ways. And I think as employers, we need to, clearly we need businesses to survive, and we need to get the economy going again. But also, I think we need to be kind. There needs to be understanding and empathy, and it's understanding the reasons why employees may not want to return to work, and some may be reasonable and some may be unreasonable. The government's position is changing all the time. The guidance is shifting. So I think it's from the 16th of August, the Welsh government has now said that people no longer need to shield, and that probably was the sort of ultimate reason why employees couldn't come to the workplace. But I think as a responsible employer, you need to show them that you have done everything to make the workplace safe. So that risk assessment that Owen mentioned previously, all the measures that you've put in place, putting a rota system in, limiting the numbers. I think also you don't necessarily want to get people back just for the sake of it. I mean, it's this balancing act between trying to show that, we are back in business, we're working with it. A lot of it is just psychological. But if employees are able to work from home and their productivity is good, and many of our clients are actually seeing increased productivity with people working from home, then maybe let that continue. But if you really do need to get employees back and they don't have a valid reason, then ultimately it could become a disciplinary matter. I think that really should be a last resort. But if there's no good reason, and childcare is a tricky one now, because actually in the school holidays, everyone's been responsible for their childcare anyway. You couldn't use the school holidays as an excuse. So if you have employees who previously worked flexibly and they took the school holidays off, or they operated differently, then obviously leave those processes in place. It may be that some of them can't get the childcare because childminders are not operating anymore, or grandparents are not available because but that shielding element is going. So it's finding that balance between the needs of the business and being reasonable. But ultimately, if someone is being unreasonable, then it could be a disciplinary matter.
Thank you. I think there's been some difference in the way that employees have reacted to the need to go back. And I suppose we've been talking about consumer confidence going back into pubs and public places. The same is true for employees, having that in confidence that they can go back into workplaces and be safe, for the whole range of different mechanisms that you identified earlier, I think is really important. I have to say, I asked the First Minister, I think on Monday, if there was going to be any change in Wales to the work at home where you can policy, and at the moment there wasn't any intention to change that. So it does give employers a certain amount of time to prepare workplaces for coming back and thinking about how that would happen. And certainly as a Chamber of Business, we're doing the same. Sorry, Damian, did you want to come in?
I mean, I think that's where employers will have to demonstrate it's work at home unless it's reasonably practical not to do so. And so there may be that balance between, well, they can actually work from home, but we really need them back in the workplace because of productivity issues. And that would be a case then of demonstrating we don't think it is reasonably practical because they're just not being productive.
Yes, yeah, and there are situations where that clearly is the case. We've had a comment here from Malcolm that just said he's had some information from Wellbeing in the Workplace this morning, and they have some webinars coming up, specifically, I guess, around the mental health issues. So maybe we can have a look at that and share those resources. We are getting to the end of the session now, and I just think we've got perhaps 1 minute each to say, is there any particular key area that would be your top takeaway from this session to leave people with before we disappear after this session? So perhaps Emma, if I come to you first, is there one particular thing that you would want to say in a very short space of time?
I'm not good at saying things in short spaces of time. But I just wanted to just quickly say that we're here to help you as employers and your employees. And I think anything you need, either come through to myself or give us a call or via Heather, whatever. We're here to help you, whatever you're facing in terms of redundancy.
Thank you, Emma, and we will share the resources that you have made available. There's lots of places to get help. Owen, is there one particular takeaway that you would leave with us today?
Yeah, I think so. If I say this a lot, it's an overused little thing I say, but if I had to summarise employment law on the back of a stamp, then the word reasonable would appear on the back of that stamp, and ultimately that is, if you look at all the legislation on employment law, the word reasonable comes up time and time again. That's the threshold that an employer must meet. An employer must act reasonably. So that I guess, in a way, if you had to simplify employment law as an employer, you have to act reasonably. And it's one thing acting reasonably, it's another demonstrating and proving that you've acted reasonably. And the way you do that is with a paper trail. So it's perhaps a bit of a cliche for lawyers to bang on about pieces of paper, but I always stress the importance of having a good paper trail to demonstrate how reasonable you have been.
Thank you. That's really good advice. And Damian, in a short space.
Yeah, just the other side of employment law is communication, and be kind, be empathetic, be open-minded. We have, the world has changed. We're still adapting, because things were done a certain way previously doesn't necessarily mean they have to be done that way going forward. Yeah. But equally, it doesn't mean that everyone has to work from home all of the time either now. And I think it's just getting that balance that is going to work for everybody. And hopefully businesses will actually become far better and far more productive in the long term as a result.
I hope so too. And that will, on that positive note, I will draw the session to a close. Thank you so much to Damian and Owen from Darwin Gray. Thank you to Emma explaining Careers Wales and how that fits into Working Wales. We will be recording this session and sharing resources afterwards. We hope you join us for our next session. Keep an eye on our website. And there is a short questionnaire if you'd be happy to fill that in as you leave. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope that's been a really helpful session for you all listening in. And I wish you a very happy rest of Thursday and as we go into the weekend. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.